The Babylon Project was our last best hope for Scott. A self-contained podcast, 1 hour long, located on the internet. A place of fun and discussion for Babylon 5 fans everywhere. A shining beacon in cyberspace, all alone in the night. It was the dawn of the 20th anniversary of Babylon 5, the year the Great War to free Bab 5 came upon us all. This is the story of the last of the Babylon podcasts. The year is 2014. The name of the place is the Babylon Project Podcast.
This is Maggie Egan, your ISN news anchor, and you're listening to the Babylon Project podcast. Thanks for listening.
Hello, Babylon 5 fans. This is Raul and Jim, and we are back yet again with the Babylon Project podcast. How are you doing tonight, my friend?
I'm doing great. Val 2, time to podcast again.
Yes. Look, I always look forward to it. That, honestly, just the fun it is sitting down and having these conversations with you is the biggest reason why I want to get this up to once a week.
Well, but I hope so.
Well, life, the universe, and everything is starting to settle down for me. So we will see where that gets us. We will definitely see where that gets us. You know, tonight we are talking about survivors.
Yes, the very first Garibaldi-centric episode.
Mm-hmm. And it's also, you know, some episodes ago I talked about there only being one really Home Guard-focused episode.
Yeah.
In a way, you could call this a Home Guard episode, but I agree with you. When I see this episode, I don't think Home Guard, I think Garibaldi.
Yes, and we get some backstory on the man now.
Yep.
Some solid, well, some story on what happened to him in his past and why he is where he is right now.
Well, I'll tell you what, let's just dive straight in and get a summary from you.
All right, let's do it.
Archive. Access initiated.
As preparations are being made to receive President Santiago, Ivanova and Garibaldi go to the Cobra Bays, where the fighters are docked, to inspect a bay that will be used to base a new wing of fighters that are being delivered to the station. As they reach the bay, there is an explosion and a crewman named Nolan is injured in the blast. Major Liana Kemmer, her assistant Cutter, and a contingent of presidential security officers arrive in advance of the president's arrival to make sure that the station is secure. Owing to the blast, Kemmer is suspicious and obviously has an axe to grind with Garibaldi. Garibaldi tells Sinclair that he was friends with Kemmer's father, who was killed in an act of sabotage. Garibaldi was accused of being negligent, and Major Kemmer is blaming him. As a result of this, Garibaldi, an alcoholic, started drinking and was on the skids for quite some time. As Nolan is trying to recover in MedLab, Kemmer attempts to interrogate him by injecting him with a drug to wake him up. With his dying breath, he implies that Garibaldi is the cause for the explosion. Major Kemmer insists that Sinclair suspend him from duty, as he is now a suspect. Sinclair, left with little choice, complies. A little later, a search is made of Garibaldi's quarters, where Cutter finds a schematic of the Cobra Bays along with an amount of Centauri ducats. Garibaldi overcomes the guards and becomes a fugitive. He approaches Londo in an attempt to learn who has implicated him. Londo doesn't know anything, but loans Garibaldi some money to help him with his investigation. Londo also says that Jakar might be the one who has planted the evidence in his quarters. Jakar isn't responsible either, and he tells Garibaldi that he has made a number of enemies on the station, and it could be any number of people. Garibaldi continues to attempt to prove his innocence with little success. He winds up in a bar in the nether regions of the station and takes a drink. While he is drunk, he is captured by Kemmer and Cutter. Cutter goes off to inspect the Cobra Bay once again as the president's arrival is imminent. As Kemmer interrogates Garibaldi, Welch enters with evidence that Nolan is a member of the Home Guard, an Earth-based anti-alien hate group. Garibaldi puts it all together, realizing that since President Santiago was announcing that he was planning to expand relations with alien races, it would be in Home Guard's interest to disrupt the delivery of the fighter wing, and that it was most likely Nolan who was accidentally killed as he attempted to plant the bomb. He then convinces Kemmer to make a personal inspection of the Cobra Bays. As she and Garibaldi arrive for inspection, Cutter stuns Kemmer and struggles with Garibaldi. Garibaldi wins, takes Cutter's comlink, and gets Ivanova to stop the countdown for the launching of the new fighter wing, who prepares for a demo flight, thus avoiding the wing being destroyed by explosives that have been planted in the doors of the bay. Garibaldi sees Kemmer off the station, but before she leaves, she realizes that she has been angry at Garibaldi for a long time and it wasn't his fault that her father died, and they reconcile.
Initiating plot analysis.
Oh, I love that one, Jim. That was good.
Yeah, thank you.
This, if my memory serves correctly, and I'm pretty sure it does, and I know Mitch has pointed this out, I'd gotten some reversals in the order of election in some of my earlier episodes as far as election versus whether or not Santiago was or was not already president. This episode is part of the reason I get that out of order, but it's also the episode that really finally got me hooked on the series. Believers, believe it or not, pardon the discussion to come out of Believers like we had last episode is fantastic, and I loved it. But like I had said, it probably hit a little too close to home from what I do on a profession, so it wasn't necessarily one of my favorites in that perspective.
Right.
And I caught Survivors, and that was the one that got me hooked. And I watched Survivors before I watched the pilot or the first episode. Yeah, so I got this episode before either The Gathering or Midnight. And that's kind of the reason, and this episode really impressed me. And that's kind of the reason why I get the election, Santiago is or isn't president backwards.
Okay. Well, is it too early then to ask you what is it about the episode that sucked you into the series, or should we save that for a little later?
Actually, this is a good time to ask.
Okay. So, Raul, what is it that sucked you about this episode that got you hooked on Babylon 5?
Well, let me answer that, Jim. One of the things that I have said for a very long time, for many years, I've said this back with Lost, I've said this back with Fringe, I've said it on The Christian Geek, I've said it on The Diner. What makes a great series, what makes a great show, isn't just characters. What makes a great show isn't just story.
Mm-hmm.
A good show can have just one or the other. And that's why I only consider Lost a good show. It had great characters. Was why I only considered the BSG reboot a good show. It had great characters. It was character driven. but both of those often fell short on the story.
Ah.
Lost story. I mean, the plot holes, the drop lines, and everything. I mean, that's been discussed ad nauseum.
Uh-huh.
BSG, the way they had to write themselves out of corners with regard to the final five, there's that bit of making it up as they go along, that they just didn't have this really solid direction where they were going to go with the entire series.
Mm-hmm.
In the case of a serial especially, having that incredibly strong story is important.
Mm-hmm.
Fringe, I think, so far has come the closest to that, but even there, they had sort of a general overview and they had a focus for the season, but they didn't have the degree of arc built that Straczynski had for Babylon 5. So, getting back to your original question, Survivors is an incredible character-driven episode. I mean, its strength comes from the characters, but the story that those characters have to act within is just as powerful and just as rich and has just as much depth when you sit down and when you look at it. So you don't have just great character and great character drive. You don't have just a great story. You have both.
Okay.
And the chemistry of characters to story just gelled completely in this episode, I think.
Okay.
And now I'll step down from the pulpit.
There we go. All right. So where do we go from here?
Where do you go from here? Well, first of all, hi, Maggie!
Yeah, we got to see Maggie.
Mm-hmm.
In the one
We
one
got
of
to
the
see
10,
our ISN reporter.
Yep, one of the 10 episodes that she appears in through the
Correct.
series. And
We also get another semi-regular character introduced to us as well.
yes.
This is Lou Welch's first episode, who's portrayed by David Crowley.
Yeah. He's neat. I really like he's a good compliment to Garibaldi.
Yeah, very much so, I think. Much more so than his current number one.
Yes.
But let's see. We also had a couple of guest stars on here.
We had Elaine Thomas as Liana Kemmer, who was the head of presidential security. And, you know, did it strike you by any chance as her seeming a little too young for that job?
Having known my share of good and talented officers, not necessarily.
Uh-huh.
If you consider the kind of drive that we see that she has, I mean, if she had served as an active duty officer, I mean, yeah, I can see it coming.
Okay.
Plus, I'd certainly leave it open that she looks younger than she is.
She doesn't have a great big list of credits to her name.
No, actually, neither of the guest stars do.
No, they don't. Let's see. Elaine has been in Bold and the Beautiful, Awake to Danger, Psychic Detective, and that was
That's
a video game. And then the one appearance here on Babylon 5.
Uh-huh. And that's pretty much it.
Yep. Our other one was Tom Donaldson, who played Cutter, and I guess you could call him Kemmer's assistant.
Correct. He's obviously a bit older than her.
Yes.
So that's where the whole idea of the drive and determination and the ruthlessness that would go with that came from.
Yeah. He's definitely has his own agenda, however.
Right, and we'll get to that when we hit our plot analysis.
Yeah. And as far as his credits are concerned,
not much more.
No. The one that stands out to me personally would be an appearance on NYPD Blue.
Which is a show that I really didn't watch myself.
Oh, that's too bad. What an awesome show.
For some reason, I have never been able to get into the police procedural. Or the police serial, for that matter. There really has only been one exception. No, I take that back. Two exceptions. One was when I was a young child. Well, not young child, but teen, I guess. And that was Cagney and Lacey.
Okay.
And the other police show that I've really gotten into has been Castle. And you can blame my son for that. He is an absolute Castle addict. Every Saturday morning, he gets up, curls up on the couch with a blanket with the dog. Well, he and the dog watch Scooby-Doo, and they watch an episode of Castle.
Well,
is that a contrast or what?
Yeah. I always liked NYPD Blue, and then the one that was before that, Hill Street Blues. Those were probably my two favorite non-science fiction shows. So, anyway.
Oh, you don't want to hear what one of my yeah, I'm not even going to go there. You will lose. Well, actually, I'll score points with Wayne Henderson, though.
Yeah.
As far as non-sci-fi, Castle has been probably one of my favorite non-sci-fis. And, I mean, Dancing with the Stars, what can I say? I hate reality TV as a whole, but I've gotten hooked on Dancing with the Stars, and it was a combination of my wife, my son, and Wayne. And for those of you who don't know Wayne Henderson, the guy is one of the most stand-up guys you will ever get to meet on Facebook or Twitter, on the internet. And he's got a couple of great podcasts out there.
Yep.
If you're an Under the Dome fan, the Under the Dome podcast is the definitive podcast for that. And if you're a Packers fan, his Green Bay Packers podcast is quite good.
It is awesome. Him and Dallin do a great job. And I am a Packer fan and listen every
Even
week.
This year?
Oh, yes. I am a Packer backer until I die.
All right.
Win, lose, or draw. All right, then.
You know, getting back to Babylon 5, which
Yes,
is what you sounded like you were about to say.
Yes, I was going that direction.
One thing I do have to say about the casting that they do, they don't necessarily just focus on, what's the word I'm looking for? Star
appeal?
They don't necessarily just focus on star appeal. I mean, they get some A-listers all the way up to Michael York, Walter Koenig, of course.
Yeah.
But here they have two people who they're listed as actors, but they've got a day job, clearly.
Yeah.
And it's not because of their acting ability, because they do a fantastic job with it. It's just they cast based on who really can fill the role for the show, for that episode.
Yes,
Not
and
just based on the star appeal, as you put it.
And who can fit. Like, for instance, Maggie Egan. Her sister, as you heard in our interview, is a news person. And, Maggie's been primarily in commercials.
Right.
But she was our news anchor for ISN for the run of the whole series.
And it's great. They really put the character and the story as the priority rather than the star.
Yeah.
Not all shows necessarily did that.
No, it definitely had to carry itself.
So Santiago's out on tour, as you had said in the summary. This is where we're finally getting Zeta Squad. He's trying to build up some support for his policies with the alien races.
Yes.
Basically to strengthen the ties, strengthen the relationship between them.
Well, yeah. And after all, Babylon 5 is built to avoid another Earth Minbari war, hopefully. And so good relations with the other occupants of the galaxy would be a requirement for that.
I would say so.
Yes.
That definitely sets us up as a prime target for the Home Guard.
Yes. Once again, we have the Home Guard is trying to sour
Boom.
the what?
Boom.
Yeah.
They're trying to boom.
And
Yep.
we do get some boom this episode.
We do get some boom today,
Yes.
which I guess means today is tomorrow.
Right. Well, and then we have Ivanova and Garibaldi almost walking right into it. Very, very close
Very much
to
so.
walking into it.
They're refurbing the fighter bays because they've been empty, which is something we really weren't aware of at this point.
Right. Empty and not maintained.
Empty and not maintained for 2 years.
Right.
So they're a little bit overdue. And as you said, Garibaldi and Ivanova pretty much barely miss walking into it. While it's thought that it could be an accident, he's not willing to rule out sabotage.
Oh, he never rules out sabotage. And then arriving on the scene, we have Liana Kemmer.
Yep. And she's not a, quote, real sweet kid anymore.
No, she looks...
Not in
she's
any
very,
sense of the word.
Yeah, she's very pretty, but
Very grown up.
in that uniform, pretty straight-laced. And
Yeah.
I would say I would even call her performance stiff, but not because she's a bad actress, just the opposite, because I think that's the way her character was
To
written.
play it as stiff and almost rude as she did
Yeah,
that consistently through the episode, that's not easy to do.
right. And also because of her relationship at this time with Garibaldi, she's very officious and as you said, rude.
And as Sinclair notes, she's got an obvious beef against him to the point of it being a witch hunt.
Yeah, it does turn into that. She got all the ammunition she needed when the repairman died on the table, thanks to her ministrations.
Mm-hmm. Though we do get some important information out of there, at least she thinks it's important information. He does confirm that it's a bomb, and they do find bomb residue.
Yes.
But he blames Garibaldi for the explosion.
That kind of threw me a little bit. Now, why would of course now Michael says later on that this crewman blamed him. What's his name? Newman, I think it was.
Nolan.
Nolan blames Garibaldi, and Garibaldi admits that he arrested him a couple weeks before this incident.
Mm-hmm.
And would that be enough to
Payback.
implicate? Well, would that on a deathbed? Would that be enough to implicate someone that is not involved?
I think it would. You would absolutely have to. That he's confirming it. That he is confirming it was a bomb, and
Yes.
that he wasn't necessarily a suspect himself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
So
you would have to at least investigate it.
is Norman Homeguard then?
Nolan, yeah, it turns out Nolan is home guard.
Okay.
They do find that. Sinclair has Lou Welch do a little investigation into that, and they find the home guard materials.
Ah,
In fact, at this point here, Kimmer is right. Leanna's right. Garibaldi does represent a conflict of interest, just by the fact that he had been implicated. Now, if she didn't have the axe to grind, it would have been fairly easy to clear him fairly quickly. Except,
Okay.
of course, we've got this little issue with Cutter. Cutter, and this is according to Joe Straczynski, in fact, Cutter takes advantage of that to set Garibaldi up to take the fall.
well, right. We know that Cutter planted the Centauri ducats and the Home Guard materials in Garibaldi's quarters.
Right. And to quote Joe Straczynski, Cutter went after Garibaldi only because that's who the dying worker named as being responsible for the bomb.
Mm-hmm.
Cutter only took advantage of the situation.
Okay. Well, now we get into Garibaldi's backstory.
Background.
Yes.
Yeah.
After an exchange with Leanna and Sinclair in the office, Sinclair wants to know what's going on.
He demands answers.
That's where Garibaldi confesses his relationship with Leanna, that her father died, not necessarily through a fault of his, but he could have prevented it had he not been
but
drinking.
there is a bit of fault there.
Yeah.
His alcoholism had been affecting his job, apparently. They set the bomb with the intent to tie that in with his drinking and get him discredited.
Right.
So it just happened to be his best friend and Leanna's dad that got taken out by that bomb.
And then she blamed him, and it became a very sad relationship between the two of them.
Yeah, and this actually hits the one piece of story that I thought was a little bit weak, and in light of everything else, it's very easy to forgive. That is, considering their background and their past, I'm surprised that Sinclair didn't know at least a general overview of this particular part of his history.
Yeah, it would make sense that he would know.
But if they didn't have to have the exposition to Sinclair, we wouldn't know.
Well, and not only that, you could also say that perhaps Sinclair knew about it, but he wanted to hear it straight from Garibaldi.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And as I said, she is definitely making this a witch hunt. She does have to, legally, in fact, at least if this was on Earth in our world today, in most communities at least, she would legally have to be obligated to at least take the investigation seriously, investigate and clear. And as you said, Cutter found the Centauri ducats, which it almost, if it weren't for what Straczynski had said already, just taking advantage of it, it would almost seem, well, I was going to say it would almost seem like he knew a little bit, but it would take a blind man not to realize that there's some serious bad blood between Kimmer and Garibaldi.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's pretty obvious.
And it reaches a point where Sinclair pretty much clamps down on the whole mess and forces a situation where she has to go through official channels for no other reason than to at least buy Garibaldi some time to try and get himself cleared.
Yeah. I was really, really sad when Sinclair took the sidearm, the ID, and his link from Garibaldi. That was very un-Sinclair-like.
It goes again back to what I had said. It's a legal obligation, and if it weren't a witch hunt, and if Cutter wasn't taking advantage of the situation to frame him, it would have been very quickly that he got them back. Obviously it was standard procedure.
Yeah. I would have expected, and they with time constraints on televisions, things like that, I would have expected Sinclair to protest a little more.
Well, at this point, I think his hands were somewhat tied procedurally.
Uh-huh.
But he definitely does make his displeasure known when he pitches her off the bridge. In fact, that's, I think, one of the best lines coming from Susan this episode was, "You are going to resist, I hope."
Yeah. Yeah, she was looking forward to that.
That puts her in the position of having to go through the chain of command and get a direct response back from a shared superior officer, in this case, a General Netter.
Yeah. Well, speaking of Susan, though, the
Yes.
other neat thing was the exchange when Kimmer demanded that Susan open a channel to Earth Dome, and she said, I don't have to do that, and I don't take demands, but I will take a request. And Kemmer says, then I request, of course, very snotty. That was perfect. Then I request a open channel. And Ivanov says, request denied, goodbye.
Click. Yep. Yeah, she has met her match with Susan.
And then, of course, Susan did a bit of sabotage on her own by ordering a communications diagnostic that was going to take several hours.
Right. And you know what was interesting is while this is going on, Garibaldi is chasing down Londo since it was Centauri ducats.
Yep.
And while Londo freely admits that, if it was politically advantageous, he'd do it, in this case, he didn't.
Right.
And
surprise, surprise, he blames G'Kar.
Yep. And I think part of Londo's helping of Mike, there was a touch of foreshadowing there, I think, in a way, as well as a bit of poignancy in his past about how he's been where Garibaldi has been before.
Oh, yes.
And he wants to believe that things can work out.
Mm-hmm.
I just kind of felt, having seen the whole series multiple times now, I just kind of felt that was a little bit of foreshadowing.
Oh, yeah. Well, Garibaldi and Londo have a relationship that is
unique,
but it's also friendly. They come to an understanding. Same thing with Garibaldi.
Eventually, when they're not trying to kill each other.
Right. Garibaldi and G'Kar also have a relationship. Mm-hmm. You remember when G'Kar came back from his little hiatus and G'Kar picks him up and starts dancing with him?
Yep.
So.
Yeah, but that's a real reflection of the growth of G'Kar's character. And speaking of G'Kar, the monitors are down, the guards are away. Again, he didn't do it, but he freely admits he actually liked the idea of the setup. As I say, he didn't do it, but you notice he does offer Garibaldi a job.
Well, of course. He sees the value in Garibaldi.
Pure opportunist.
Mm-hmm.
And I love G'Kar's line, the three things that run the universe: energy, matter, and enlightened self-interest.
Yes. I thought it was kind of neat that as Michael was passing by G'Kar's quarters, the door was open and he peeked in, and without even looking, G'Kar says, "Come in, Mr. Garibaldi."
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Because he probably knew Londo was going to implicate him.
And as he says, he spies on Londo, Londo spies on him. What one knows, the other knows fairly quickly.
Yeah. I'll tell you what, confidentiality on Babylon 5 is just non-existent. Everybody knows everybody's business.
Yeah. Garibaldi's gone through the ambassadors that may have been involved, so now he's trying to chase answers out down below, and you know what? It seems he's not that popular down there for some reason.
Well, yeah, imagine that. Well, yeah, Garibaldi goes to ground, and he gets himself into a bar, and he's being chased.
After being beaten into the ground.
Well, yeah, that's right. And Sinclair saved him and wanted to pull him in to try to help him solve the problem, but Garibaldi was determined to do it on his own.
Yeah. And there he falls.
Yeah. He goes into the bar and he's being chased and has an exchange with an alien, and the alien repays Garibaldi for a Centauri ducat with a bottle of whiskey.
Well, that's not all he turns out to repay him with, because while Garibaldi is stumbling into that whiskey, that alien is stumbling into the nearest comlink and turning Garibaldi in.
Yeah.
So Garibaldi falls off the wagon just in time to be turned in. And that's where we hear the line, "Drunk again, Uncle Mike?"
Yeah.
Now, that was actually a hard bit to watch.
Yeah.
But the show definitely it's going to deal with it again a little more thoroughly, I believe, is it season 5?
I'm not sure.
I believe it'll be in season 5.
Yeah, Garibaldi falls off the wagon again later on.
And proceeds to get himself captured, which actually turns out to be a good thing because, as I had said earlier, Sinclair had Nolan checked out by Lou Welch. Turns out that he is a Home Guard sympathizer.
Yeah.
So that it was actually him that planted the bomb. Now, my question for you, Jim, is how did Sinclair know to check? I mean, just a hunch? Because just a hunch is all I've been able to come up with.
Thinking back, probably just being thorough.
Uh-huh.
Check the guy's background and see where he's coming from. Trying to find out why this particular thing happened. Was it an accident? Was it sabotage? Is there some element on the station that needs to be watched? Yeah, a hunch would be good. Probably an educated hunch.
Yep. But with this little revelation, and just from a bit of elimination, I think we see a little of Kimmer's honest side start to peek through here, because with Nolan turning out to be Home Guard, it's like, okay, she's starting to be a little ready to give Garibaldi the shadow of a doubt, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And now there's some suspicion of Cutter, because Cutter is the only one who would have had any opportunity to plant the ducats.
Yeah.
Kimmer's convinced to go check the Cobra Bays herself.
Because of an urging from Garibaldi.
Right. And oops, it turns out Cutter is Home Guard.
Yeah. Did you think it was a bit unusual that she took Garibaldi as being the prime suspect in this thing along with her?
I think she was starting to finally be honest with herself. I think it was more her being honest with herself that, you know what, it might actually be a witch hunt that she was on. Oh. And if nothing else, Garibaldi was a good cop.
Oh, yes.
The whole reason they rigged that landing platform to blow that killed her father was because he was being so effective and stopping down for the mob's criminal operations on Io.
Ah.
So, yeah, it might have been unusual. It would have been very unusual, I think, if it had been pretty much anyone but Kimmer and Garibaldi.
Yeah.
And, of course, we get the classic fight and last-second save.
Yeah.
And that is the one thing I do have to say I didn't like. Susan continually, "Stop the launch, Susan, stop." What? Are you sure? Garibaldi, is something wrong? Stop the Well, this really...
Yeah.
As the clock ticks down to 1.
1 second. Yeah. Now, I
overused.
I second that. She had a good, 20, 30 seconds of lead time, and it's coming from Garibaldi. Who else would she need to hear it from in order to stop the launch immediately?
Right. I mean, he's in a fight for his life. They don't need more drama. It's not really adding to the drama.
Yeah.
That little trope tends to do more harm than good, because it's like, okay, here we go again. The moment you see something like that happen, you know it's going to be a last-second save.
Yeah.
So the build-up is more or less gone.
Mm-hmm.
At least for me, it is at that point.
No, that definitely, when I watched that again this evening, I definitely focused on that. I mean, how many times does she have to be told? She's a lot sharper than that.
Uh-huh.
And a second in command, she could make that decision without even thinking about it.
Yeah. But regardless, Babylon 5 has a full complement of fighters now.
Yes. And new fighters.
And new fighters. Liana and Garibaldi seem to have made their peace.
Yes.
And you notice how much softer Liana's hair is when they leave.
I know. That kind of bothered me.
It really didn't bother me too much. I think it's just a bit of the catharsis for her letting go of some of the pain and some of the anger.
I personally, I thought it was just a bit of overkill. You know, she wasn't off the job. She was on her way to another job, and all of a sudden she's let her hair down, and she did that
Susan
well
has
enough.
done that as well.
She did that well enough with her acting when she turned around and went back and hugged Garibaldi before she left.
Okay, now I see you coming. I see where you're coming from.
Yeah.
The performance was strong enough; it didn't need the visual.
Yeah, I think, in my mind, they took advantage of that situation. But, you know, I suppose there's folks out there that may not have caught it at first.
Yep.
You know, that scene, something that was interesting, I was reading earlier today, I think it was in Straczynski's quotes, that the only things in that scene that are real are Garibaldi, Kemmer, and the ladder.
Yeah.
Everything else is CGI in that.
Mm-hmm.
So they're pioneering new ground with CGI.
It was and remains. This is why in my 5 for 5, it was the number 2 most important sci-fi show on television. All of the things that it pioneered. And that kind of a CGI virtual set was definitely it.
Yeah.
And when you look at what they have today, you can go back and thank Babylon 5 for that.
Yep.
I do have one question about Liana. I honestly don't know the answer. I don't think you're going to know the answer. If anyone out there in our audience has heard the answer, please pass it along to us. So, was Liana on Earth Force One when it blew?
I am going to say no. Her job is an advance investigator. She takes an advance team out and checks the sites over for problems. So I would say she was probably on assignment somewhere checking things out before President Santiago showed up somewhere.
In that breath, yes, but she's also head of presidential security. So it's one of those little twiggly side bits that just kind of sticks in my mind and that I've wondered about for years.
Would I be out of line? Would I be out of line if I said that that's the way I choose to think about it since she forgave Garibaldi? If she had not, I would say yes, she was definitely on Earth Force.
You would not be out of line to say that at all, because I tend to be a romantic at heart, and I don't. When I say a romantic, I'm talking about in the literary sense, not the boy-girl attraction sense. Okay,
right.
That romantic at heart of me does exactly what you just said.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that her and Garibaldi had that reconciliation. Yep, she wasn't on the. I just presume she wasn't on that ship.
And you know something, knowing the way the story arc is, I think if she had been killed in that explosion, that it would have been brought up in the show.
Or just mentioned somewhere, somehow.
Exactly. Garibaldi, they would have mentioned to Garibaldi this happened, and he would have said, oh, geez, that's too bad. I just love that kid, or something like that.
Yep.
That would be a thread that I would not imagine that this show would not examine.
If not examine it, Straczynski was one of the best I've seen at providing answers. So
Yeah, he wouldn't overlook something like that.
well, any observations? I think we've kind of mentioned our likes and particular likes and dislikes already.
Mm-hmm.
Any particular observations that you'd want to bring out about this episode?
Well, I think, and again, here it is. It's probably because of the time that's on the show. I really didn't feel like the advanced team had really done anything other than focus on that explosion. And I would think that if there were an explosion and Home Guard implicated, knowing Santiago's position, that they would have turned Earth Force One right around and sent him back until things could have been more secured at a later date.
My answer to that would be that I think it was a matter of she was so blinded by her anger that she thought she had it completely under control and was definitely Garibaldi until it turned out that it wasn't.
Well, then I would have to question her judgment as the head of presidential security.
In that, you would agree with Susan and Commander St. Clair and myself, frankly,
Mm-hmm.
in that regard.
So perhaps she was too young to be... No, I'm just kidding.
Mm-hmm. Well,
I'll tell
maybe
you
not
what.
too young, but not mature enough. At
No.
least before this, when this episode started, that perhaps not mature enough.
Right. We had a visit here in Kearney several years ago by President Clinton. And I'll tell you what, this town was crawling with strangers in dark suits and headsets. And a friend of mine was standing on a roof of a building that is, I believe, 6 miles from the airport
Mm-hmm.
with a camera. And all he wanted to do was take pictures of Air Force One landing, and the Secret Service made him get off of that building.
On the flip side, though,
Yeah.
being here in St. Louis, I ended up having to take a detour because of bad traffic.
Mm-hmm.
And that ran me past Lambert International, which is St. Louis's airport. And I got caught by a police detour.
Uh-huh.
Well, it turns out it was actually a worthwhile traffic followed by police detour because I got to see Air Force One
Oh, neat.
up close. Yeah. Unfortunately, I didn't have a camera, so I couldn't take a picture of it, but I did get to ask, I asked the officers, this was before I had seen it, it's like, what's up? Is there an accident or something? Or I said, no, just Air Force One coming in. My timing was just perfect to see it. So, from that perspective, I was probably, I would say I was within hundreds of yards of Air Force One.
Now, the Air Force One, they
separated
landed...
by a fence.
The Air Force
Just
One,
a
they
chain
landed...
link fence. I'm sorry, gosh. I'm sorry, Jim.
The Air Force One they landed here was not the Air Force One, because you can't land a 747 out here at Kearney Airport. It was a Learjet.
Okay. No,
But-
this was the Air Force One
Ah.
in that case.
Whatever plane the president is on, that one is Air Force One.
Uh-huh. Exactly. Okay, my turn on standout observations.
Yes.
I actually have two, and one of them is more of a season one observation. Is it really only in season one that you hear jump gates frequently called vortex generators? They're using both terms, jump gate and vortex generator.
Huh.
I don't think we see it called anything but a jump gate after season one. So just one of those little subtle refinements.
Wow. That's pretty picky, because I don't recall hearing vortex generator.
This is just something that I started, kind of scratched my head with, and it comes from having rewatched the series every few years.
Oh.
Now, on a little more of a serious note, this episode, one of the things that really impresses me about it, it is a standalone episode. It's a solid standalone episode. It can completely stand on its own.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, at the same time, there's more story arc in it than you realize.
Oh, yeah. From my point of view, we know that somebody is out to get President Santiago, for one thing.
At least from a completely discrediting, destroying, not necessarily a killing perspective at this point, but
Right.
Yep. There's that, and there's a lot of depth added to Garibaldi's character. His character is advanced considerably. We get a little more of the nuanced side of the relationship between the Centauri and the Narn.
I think we also get a little bit closer look at the goings-on of Down Below.
We get a little more of the goings-on of Down Below. Babylon 5 is now better armed than it was at the beginning of the episode. And that's going to get taken to its final step in season 2. So, in one way you can think of it as just, this is a step away from being strictly a United Nations in space to being a little more military in its perspective.
Yeah.
So, not in big ways, nothing necessarily in a big way, but in a lot of little ways, this episode advances the arc.
And without knowing what's coming down the road,
you would never see it.
You wouldn't necessarily catch up on that right away.
And it's not necessary in any manner for being able to fully enjoy the episode.
Yeah.
And of course, the last comment, this does a fantastic job, in my opinion, on dealing with the subject of alcoholism. I have had friends and family who have struggled with alcoholism. And this is a great dealing with that subject.
Okay. Well,
so
you think
great episode.
Think we've looked at this one enough, or is there anything else?
I think we do. This was an episode that was just a lot of fun and a lot of enjoyment for me.
Yep. Well,
next week, by any means necessary.
Yes.
I'm looking at this. We've got some really good stuff.
Yes.
Coming up. We've had Survivors this time. We've got By Any Means Necessary next, and then after that we've got Signs and Portents. Then we get what some people call a weak episode, but I happen to like TKO.
Yeah, I've got to watch that one again yet.
And after that, after TKO, it is one roller coaster ride to the end of the season.
Yes, it is. With a big surprise ending to the whole season. So, By Any Means Necessary is going to be a fun episode to do.
Again, another fun one.
Yes.
We get to have some fun after having a couple of really deep shows with Believers and War Prayer.
Yeah. So I think you should take us out now.
All right. Well, my friends, I'm going to go ahead and say it, even though we did have a little bit of it early on, but no boom today, my friend.
Boom tomorrow?
Yep. There's always a boom tomorrow.
All right.
Have a good night, folks.
So long now.
Podcast terminated. Thank you for listening to the Babylon Project podcast. You can email Raul and Jim at the Babylon Project podcast at gmail.com. You can find us on Facebook at the Babylon Project Podcast. On the internet, we are at babylonprojectpodcast.wordpress.com. To subscribe to the podcast, you can find us on iTunes, or you can subscribe to the RSS feed on the webpage.